We're in
So,
now.
you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I think
Yeah. Whatever. Okay. This evening, I am doing a podcast that I've wanted to do for some time, and now I have found somebody who's willing to do it. We can answer some questions that I've had for a very long time. A lot of you know that I grew up with my father being a clergyman. Yeah, I didn't say vicar, did I? That drives my father mad, so that's why I said that. So tonight, what do I call you? I've asked you this before. I know that your name's Sarah, but
Yep, Sarah's fine.
But you're a Reverend Sarah and a Dr. Sarah.
Yep.
So what do we call you?
So if you see me out in the villages, most people just call me Reverend Sarah.
Reverend Sarah.
Yeah.
I kind of like that.
Yeah.
Do you like that? It's kind of familiar.
Yeah, it is familiar for me because I spent a long time being called Dr. Sarah, so it just swapped a title a bit.
What are you a doctor of?
Medicine.
Oh my! So you're an actual doctor?
Real
doctor?
doctor.
Like a bona fide doctor?
Yeah, no poking holes in donuts and things
Okay,
like
well that
Real.
opens a whole... Poking holes in donut. That opens a whole rake of new questions, which
Wow.
I hadn't even thought of, so I
There
told you
you
to
go.
change. Okay, Sarah, where are you the vicar of, or the priest in charge of at this point?
Great Amwell with St Margaret's and Stansted Abbots.
Okay,
So 3 villages.
3 villages, 3 churches.
Yes.
Okay, and it's called the three
Churches benefits.
churches benefice. Okay, and
Yep.
the benefice is churches working together.
Yeah.
Okay, see, education even for the likes of me. Okay, I want to take you all the way back to when you had an idea that maybe your faith gave you a direction to move in working wise, but
Cool.
you were a doctor before you were Reverend Sarah.
Yeah.
So let's start with that. So always wanted to be a doctor when you were young?
From about 11.
11.
Yeah.
Focused young human.
Yes.
Okay. So, doctor, explain what do you have to do to be a doctor?
So, well, do you know what I say to my kids is you can be a doctor, but there has to be the only thing that you ever wanted to do and you can't imagine doing anything else.
Right.
So that's where I'd start from. You've got to imagine, you can't
All
imagine to
encompassing.
do. Yeah. It's got to be something that you're called to do in one way or another.
Okay.
You have to do a lot of science, GCSEs and A-levels.
Hmm.
And then you have to go to uni to do medicine, which is these days usually 5 or 6 years
Okay.
of training.
Right. So you've done all the training, 5 or 6 years at university, and then
Yeah.
you've got to do.
And then you've got to do house jobs. So
Right.
a year in your first lot of house jobs, and then
House
another
jobs?
Year. Yeah. Pre-registration house officer. It's like the first year of being a doctor.
So in a hospital.
In a hospital,
Right.
usually. Or
Okay.
they can do some GP stuff these days. They keep changing the training. But
So
yeah.
how far down the doctor road did you get before you found?
Before I changed careers,
Mm.
I did 20 years as a doctor
Okay.
from
Wow.
post-training.
Okay.
As a GP or a...
So I started off in hospital medicine, and then I spent a couple of years in hospices, and then I trained as a GP, and then I went back to hospice medicine. So probably most of the last 15 years of my practice I was in hospices.
So can I ask, is there a link between hospices and your faith?
Definitely. But actually the link starts before then, because I was brought up in a family that went to church regularly,
Okay.
a family with faith. And when I was at school and I was 11, the call to be a doctor and the time when I was confirmed and I thought, this is for me, I'm going to do this for God, was completely combined together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the doctor, it wasn't separate. Then it wasn't a separate thing. It wasn't. I'm being a doctor and then I'm becoming a clergy person.
I'm becoming a doctor happened like so way before.
Yeah.
I had no intention of being a clergy person at all.
Right. So, what was the switching point?
So the switching point was a moment in which our world was shaken. I have 3 lovely children. Whenever I tell anybody how old they are, they go, oh, it's a big gap. I've got a 20-year-old, a 16-year-old and an 8-year-old.
Okay.
And the gap is the unfillable gap of losing a child.
Sorry to hear that.
So we had our third daughter, Grace, was stillborn at 19 weeks.
Okay.
And we were looked after by a fantastic chaplain in the hospital at Princess Alexandra. And while she was looking after us and praying for us, I had this little voice in my head that went, you could do that. And over the weeks after that, it turned into an I want you to do that.
Okay. So, I mean, without belittling anything, so you're hearing the word of God, however you manifest that. That's amazing to hear something genuine that actually goes that way. So, clear-cut instructions, as it were.
Yep.
So, how do you make that transition? How do you? I mean, to be honest, you've got a godlike situation as a doctor, whether you're humble or not, and then your transition to being a clergy. What is that? A vicar, a clergy. But what am I saying?
A priest.
A priest. God damn it! There's the word. Right.
So priest for me, with not knowing anything about this, priest sounds like it's at a higher level for some reason. Do you know what I mean?
I get that. Priest to me sounds Roman Catholic rather than Church of England.
Yeah.
But you see, this is one point that I am going to get to about everything, is that faith, God, institutions, religions are taken at face value by the person looking at them, if they're not you, if they're not a priest. So you've come out, so where do you stop being a doctor and start being a priest? Because is there theological college? Is there that for you?
Yeah, so what I did was immediately afterwards, I sat on that thought for a year.
Yeah.
Because I think whenever you're bereaved of anything, you should never make any quick decisions about anything whatsoever. Just sit on it for at least a year before you decide that anything is going to change at all.
Yeah.
So that's what I did first. And then I started exploring it. So I went to my priest at the time. And because God has a sense of humour, I was actually going to the Catholic Church with my Catholic husband and my children.
Right.
So I went to see my Catholic priest, and he was just absolutely lovely. And he went, well, of course, you'll have to go down to the Anglicans, you know.
Because the Catholics don't take your kind.
You know, but he said the Catholic Church can't ignore the ministry of women forever.
Oh, very true.
And I went, hallelujah.
was going down to the Anglicans seen as a demotion, or was that just literally go down to them?
Just down the hill.
Okay, so to be a priest, there's basically it's another degree, is it not?
It can be, yes. It's certainly another whole load of training. So I did, first of all, you have to go through discernment. So it isn't an automatic thing. You can't say, I want to be a priest, and they go, yeah, sure.
It sure is a book.
Yeah.
Go and read it.
They go, okay, so it took about 2 years of meeting with a priest in the diocese, and meeting her like once a month, and doing assignments, and having long conversations, and a trip to a psychologist, and an application for a bishop's advisory panel.
Right.
And then a 48-hour interview.
Sorry?
I know. It's yeah, you go for 48 hours, and there are various different things that you do within the interview.
They're not starving you from sleep or anything. You're allowed to sleep.
You're allowed to sleep, and you get to go to
Food
meals,
and
you get catered for, and it's. It's either the most terrifying thing in your life, or actually just the most lovely escape from looking after small children.
48 hours a piece-ish.
Yeah, it was wonderful. You know, you get to go to morning prayer and evening prayer and waft around a bit and do a few interview things and disappear off to the cathedral and make new friends. And hopefully at the end of it you come out and they go, yeah, I agree with you. You are called to be a priest.
Do you know what that standard would be? What they're looking for? I mean, is it...
Yeah, there are published standards that they're looking for, but they're looking really for a sense of calling, for a spirituality, for an ability to learn and reflect, and to work with other people. You know, there's a team working.
Yeah.
you know, to be able to present to people, to be able to stand up in front of people, and just really an all-round sense that you'll be able to do this job in your way, because there's not one way to be a priest.
No, yeah. I mean, my father's always said, so for clarity, my father was a parish priest when I was 3 or 4. He was chaplain of Eton. Then he was a parish priest I don't know if I'm allowed to say priest with him. I don't know what to call him. He just gets angry, whatever I call him about that.
You'll find out.
Yeah, so I will have an email going, I have told you I am a clergyman. Right, so there we go. But then we went to 2 very small parishes, one called Trull and one called Stegursey. And Stegursey was lovely. That was like little community of people who looked after each other and wasn't particularly high church. And then Trull was very much ruled by an iron rod of God. You know, you'll do this, you have to do this. My mother had struggled with that because obviously she wasn't high church at all. But, you know, that's where it was. And he always said that his major function was pastoral care, which is what I said to you the first time I met you. And, I think it's important to sometimes take the God out of the situation, because church and religion and all of that is more about the care of the community around you than it is about, focusing on God sometimes. Or is it not? Is God always the focus? How about that for a question?
I think God pervades everything, because the reason why we care for each other is because we love each other, and the reason why we love each other is because God loves us, and that's how he's made us to be, so that we're created to be in relationship with each other and in community. That's how he's made us.
So, okay, there's a question there as well that'll come out in a minute.
Yeah.
The loss of community is something that I live in constantly, and that's why I started Coffee and Coping with these guys.
Yeah.
We'll get to that. Okay, so what happens after you qualify or you step in?
So after you go through the panel and you get told yes you can become a priest, then you have to train. So I trained part-time over 3 years, so I carried on working, and I did once a week small group learning, and then I did 6 weekends a year away and a summer school in the summer, and lots of studying and working while being placed in a church environment and still carrying on doing what I was doing before.
Are you known as a curate?
Not at that stage. You're an ordinand.
An ordinand.
And then when you've done 3 years of that, then you get ordained and you become the curate.
Which is like it's not
Which
quite...
is like an apprenticeship, really.
Yeah,
Closest. Okay. It's an apprenticeship with a priest.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a hierarchy in the church, obviously, everyone answers to the diocese and bishops and archdeacons and all of that. And I remember these people around me as youth, like there was an archdeacon who told me I was slow to walk, and he walked into the room and he said, "It's about time you got up and walked, isn't it?" And I did, and I walked in. And these were pivotal people in my childhood, but I didn't and never have noticed them in a religious eye, because that wasn't my view at that time. I was too young, or then I moved away from organised religion. I want to, as you're put in a learning position and you're given, it's not like a book of spells, you know what I mean? You're given a Bible, you're given all kinds of teachings from different directions, presumably, so you can have a balanced view. What is the way to learn that? Do you read the Bible, swallow it whole? It sounds odd to me that you've got this book of guidelines, how to live your life and all that. You've got the Old Testament, which is all fire and brimstone, and then you've got a New Testament, which is like, come on, let's work together. How do you react to being guided by a book, being led by?
I think the thing is about the Bible that it's really... it's a load of different books, and you get different things from the different books. So there are... if you look at the Old Testament, if you actually want to read a rip-roaring read in which you think, oh my goodness, I didn't know how people could get it wrong so many times and mess up their lives and still God loves them, then read Genesis, which is just... it's a story of families and family life. It rivals Dallas or Dynasty. Really does.
Yeah.
In terms of bizarre and strange things that people do. Abraham pretends Sarah's his sister twice, and you think, didn't you learn the first time? Why did you do the same thing again, you silly man? And there's so much that speaks about real life in a book like that. And then you get other books that are just the law, Deuteronomy. There's lots of laws: do this, do that, do the other, do this. And they're more hard to read through. But then you read something like the Psalms, which are songs, and they are filled with people saying, God, why have you done this? Why am I going through this? And yet I'm going to trust you. There's lots of different kinds of literature in the one book.
Yeah.
And you have to read them differently because they are not all, this is the way you must behave. In fact, you have to be really careful. If you read Job, there's big sections of it that are written, the words of Job's mates, and they get told off at the end for getting it completely wrong. So if you took it out of context, you'd be going completely against what you should be doing.
So how strong was your knowledge of all of that before you started the training? Shouldn't you admit that in public?
Well, I wanted to be a doctor, so I just did all sciences, and I loved a bit of history, so I did my history GCSE. I didn't do RE from like the age of 13. It was like one of the ones I ditched early on. So I had very little. Obviously I had been to church, so you pick up a lot of information. But I definitely went into training thinking, you better give me some kind of filing system for the stuff I've got and help me to work out the rest. But I think I'd already worked out in 20 years of medicine that you never know it all. You've got to keep learning all the way along. So, I think it just made me come out the end of it feeling a bit humble and thinking, definitely there are some books of the Bible I have not read from cover to cover. I better do that. So, still learning.
Do you see yourself as guided by that book?
Yes.
Now?
Yeah, because Christians believe that the Bible is the living Word of God, and every time you go back to it, there's something new, and there's so much information in it, but a lot of it is contextual. It's in a context that it's in at the time, but it's also written to illuminate the context you're in at the moment, and as that changes, you're going to pick up different things from it over time.
Yeah, your life perception changes constantly.
Absolutely.
So therefore, the words mean different things at different times.
Yeah.
And if those words are that transient, then they can move with you and your need. And I get that. Okay, here's the big question that I've always wanted to ask, right? And I'm jumping ahead because I don't care. It's my show.
Yeah.
Every single time that I've looked at the Bible rationally and the other books, so the Quran, Jewish books, all of this, I see social control. Right? And this is kind of a puerile argument, but I can't go into it deeply because we'll be here all night. How do you answer the fact that for all the different religions, we'll call them for want of a better word, there is a slightly different book that leads the people in different areas in the way they should live, breathe and behave? Now, I see that as a very clever way from the beginning of showing people what they need to behave to make their work, their lives, their interactions be successful for society rather sometimes than for them.
What I always find so interesting is that wherever your holy book comes from, they all have very similar ideas, which for me, you could say that it comes from an attempt to control socially, but I think what it comes from is that deep-seated truth about human beings as people who are naturally quite selfish and need to be guided into selflessness. And I think it's fascinating that so many of them are so similar. I think it speaks of the nature of humans. And the need to relate to the divine.
The trouble I have is that because I'm more cynical than you are, and I've lived a different life, I see it I see it as that movement is directional for the people it's talking to, which is very convenient. So, you know, and that, but I don't, at no point am I disparaging towards religion, right? People who have a faith, I see them as lucky in as much as they have something that they can genuinely rely on to help them through. My mother, for instance, died of multiple sclerosis when I was 27, but she had unwavering faith, and believe me, she had no reason to have that, you know, dying of that. But also, you know, growing up where she did, there were certain levels of nastiness involved in her life and different things, which I'm not prepared to talk about. But her faith was a support system in her illness. Obviously, I don't want to talk about your situations because I don't know how you feel because I wasn't there, but I can relate to the fact that you had a time in your life that was full of grief and therefore found solace from that priest that was looking after you.
Yeah.
Did that? But that already built on the fact that you were a practicing Christian already.
Yes. Yeah.
I struggle with the concept of an all-powerful being.
Yeah.
And is that what God's supposed to be? Is it a being?
Yes. Yes, an all-powerful, all-loving God. Yeah.
Non-interventionist though, can't intervene for everyone.
Well, you know, I think the thing that we don't take into account with God, which is actually very current, I think, is the idea of consent. God does not go blasting into people's lives without their consent. He doesn't come and, you know, turn your world upside down without your consent. He doesn't. He offers a path, but he doesn't demand that you go down it.
Okay, that's interesting.
That's my Christian concept of God.
No,
and I think because God's been invitational and invited us to try out rules and see if they help us, which often they don't. Sometimes they do. You know, getting a sense of that there might be a right way to do things is a really useful thing, especially when you're talking about children. You know, no is no and yes is yes. And to a certain extent, I think you can see the word of God through the Old Testament almost like starting to talk to children. Let me give you some rules and see how you cope with it. Now you're not going to cope with the rules and you're beginning to the point where you're missing the whole point, which is the heart. And Jesus comes into that bit and things seem to change as, in a way, we have to grow up and go, I failed on the rule bit, you know, something different has to happen.
So it's a lesson in finding your own way. If you've gone outside of the teachings and you've let that go, you can revert back because you found your path back to him.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm uncomfortable with that and I have no idea why. And I'll be honest with you, I wish I did know why, because then my life would be an awful lot easier. You know, it's organised religion these days seems to be a little bit on the wane, as it were, because you know, a lot of people are not turning to that because they have freedom of information. They are overloaded with what they see as truth from different media outlets, which is laughable, and also the internet and all of this. So no longer is the belief in God so ingrained in society because it's no longer the entertainment on a Sunday, the place to get help. The place where you can go and see your friends who you don't see because you are working in the fields 6.5 days a week. How, as a priest, do you cope with the lessening of the impact of the church that you work with?
I think most priests would recognise that there are different seasons. And we're working in a really different space. But what we're offering is the same as has always been offered. And the number of folk really following God is not... those who come to church has shrunk, but I think those who are seeking, deeply seeking, is probably, in some senses, it's not more, but it's there is a remnant. We have still got a place for people on a Sunday, but I think we also have a place for people who are realizing that this busy run around doing world can't be all there is. You know, that there is something about being a human being and not a human doing that is really important. But I think more importantly, you know, when as a priest believing that God is out there, I think God is wanting to bring peace and direction to people's lives when they've got no direction and no sense of what their life purpose is, and they're lost and stuck in a round of doing the same things all over again and making the same mistakes all again and messing up their lives and other people's lives, and they just want to get out of that destructive cycle. And that's what God promises.
How do people find their way back to God though? If a lot of people will tell you that they don't have a position on God because it's not part of their existence. Now, obviously, you have to. I mean, I'm not telling you what you have to do, but from my perception, is you have to believe that God's there. You have to be able to see what He does. What do you say to people who are lost, who don't believe that the figurehead of the church is somewhere that they need to be? How do you persuade people who have lost their way?
I think if you're looking for God, you need to look for God. You don't need to look for religion. You need to look for God. You need to seek Him, and I think He's available to everybody.
So you're not looking to go to church. You're not looking to be present in that. You're looking for some kind of faith.
I think it makes sense that if you're looking for God and you want to experience His presence and know His peace, you need to come to His house.
Yep. I always liked the idea when I was young.
That doesn't mean He's only there, but it's a great place to find Him because He promises to be wherever 2 or 3 people are gathered together.
Yep.
So if you want to find God, you can do that very easily by walking into church on a Sunday.
You can.
If you're open to it.
Yeah.
You can also find a strange bunch of, you know, priests and dressed up funny and old ladies and old gentlemen and kids making a racket in the back, you know. But you can find within that the peace of God and a community that seeks to care and travel together.
There's a phrase that just jumped out of my head now, the peace of God, which something about understanding passes all understanding. So you're not supposed to understand, are you? Because He's kind of like a...
Yeah, well, I mean, God says of Himself, you know, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts, and my ways than your ways. So to completely understand God would be impossible, and to have complete certainty and to be able to argue for the existence of God is incredibly hard, because there is within that a faith element.
You have to have some kind of faith to even have that conversation. Also, playing devil's advocate, because that's kind of seems appropriate. It could also be the argument why you can't find God, and because He's not all seeing, He's not all being, He's not, you know, the problem I have with organised religion and the concept of God is the one that everyone reaches to. You know, there's a famous thing where Stephen Fry said, he'd say, how dare you for all this and all that. But you've addressed that by saying that, you know, he's not going to crash into your life without being invited in. What happens when you don't know about God? Because there are communities that don't know about God. They don't know that there's that. How does He suggest ways there?
I think He's gently waiting for anyone to be open spiritually and to be prepared to listen. And you know, God is love, and you know, so in some senses there isn't a dark place where God is not.
Yeah, no,
you know,
that's
when there's any sense of love and care, He's there.
Yeah.
He may not be recognised. But I think He's there.
The trouble with my cynicism is, and I say to that, then that, you know, that's too easy. The argument again is against that. I mean, He might be there, But if he doesn't show himself, how do we know? That's because I've grown up in a society that says what's real is in front of you, which detracts from, belief systems. I mean, there's a lot of spirituality about these days, which isn't the same. So you're not recognizing God as the figure that is suggested in the Bible, but you are seeing a spiritual being that is bigger than yourself.
And I think I love The Simpsons.
Right.
Yeah, but in The Simpsons, God is a big white guy with a big beard, and I think we need to recognise that we try to make God, who is a spiritual being that we can't see and who is larger than we can imagine. In Isaiah, it says that the hem of his robe filled the temple. Well, that's pictorial, imaging, but then how big does God have to be if the hem of the robe he's wearing fills the entire temple? He's not a physical being, he is a spiritual being.
Yeah.
So in some ways, that spiritual being that you can't quite understand and can't grasp, and your brain is not large enough, that is God.
Yeah. You see, the problem I think that we have explaining the spiritual being is the fact that people need to know what they're believing in. Yeah. And therefore the robes and the beard and the sitting on a cloud, the plurality of that, the puerile nature of that explanation has been used for so long that everyone then fights against that.
Yeah.
But
I think you should. Please don't imagine he's a Yeah.
Okay. I wanna explore faith as a concept as well. As somebody who has that faith, do you, right, and don't take offence to my words, but do you blindly believe that you are being looked after? Is that what faith is?
I think faith is probably more complicated than that. Faith is about that sense of knowing that you have, from time to time, encountered God,
right,
and that he is there constantly, even when you don't know that he is.
Okay.
And sometimes the road of faith is filled with, that sense of of God's presence with you and the peace. And sometimes it is, a time of, feeling like you're going alone and going, where are you in the midst of this? And that really is faith. It's holding on when you're absolutely sure, and when you're thinking, what am I doing this for? Because I'm not sure that I even, what if all of it's a load of rubbish and I've spent all this time following it? That is faith. It's a perseverance through both, through the times.
It's a pretty existential crisis to find yourself with the loss of God.
I don't think. I don't think it's that unusual. There are, and even among people who are Christians and have been for many years. And there are some mornings when I wake up and think, what if I've got it all wrong?
But you always come back round to the fact that, does that lesson be when your day gets busy? Like, what if I've got this wrong, and then your day gets busy and you just put it to one side and get on?
I think actually, it probably lessens when I slow down my day. It lessens when I sit and spend time, like today, at midday prayer, sitting and reading the Bible, having a chat with everybody about what we all thought about that passage, and just praying, and then it lessens. Then I can get that sense of God's presence.
You get a surety back from your own faith. But faith is not a belief, is it? It's not as puerile as that, is what I mean. It's not as easy as that. Faith is something where you are challenged, you will return to God.
Yeah. I think the key part of faith is trust.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can believe and it doesn't really impact on your daily life.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of people in this country who believe, and often it's not until they encounter real problems or death and grief and things like that they question that. But I think faith is about taking that belief and trusting and working with God daily. And sometimes that trust is really easy and you're bombing along fine, and sometimes it is one moment at a time. You know, can I trust you for this next moment?
Yeah. I mean, speaking as an addict, you know, one day at a time is a phrase that I recognise.
Yeah.
I wonder somehow whether faith itself doesn't need the churches, doesn't need the structure, but does need figureheads such as yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think faith doesn't necessarily need the church. I think there's a limit to how much your faith can really grow unfed and unwatered.
Yep.
So God can be with you and you can live a good life without going to church, and you can have something that impacts you and your family. But I think to really grow your faith and to develop your personality, your holiness, your strength, your resilience as a person of faith, you need to walk with other people as well. You have to have them cheering you on in the bad times, and you have to cheer them on too. And it is a community thing as well as a personal thing. Right,
community is the thing that, you know, obviously I bang on about all the time, but, you know, obviously, you know, the Church of England is a community of people who have the same belief systems, if not the same belief.
We have a wide variation.
Yeah, listen, that was a gross generalisation, but if you look at it, but also the thing I have problems with, I think, as well, I have quite a lot of problems, if you've realised, is that when you are in acceptance of God and the Church of England or Catholicism or you know, whatever it is, you are looking to that faith as a guide, as something that will help you. Yeah. What do you say to people who live blameless lives, you know, lives that are full of, you know, rich community, giving back, that have absolutely no belief system? Would you say that God claims that, but even though they don't know that that's why they're doing what they're doing?
I don't know, but I've done a lot of funerals for people who don't necessarily have an outward faith, whose faith is a very quiet part of their life, and may not be visible at all. I remember doing a funeral visit to a family. There was a husband the husband had died, and he was his wife and his daughter. I mean, he died in his 80s, something like that. And his wife was a woman of faith, and his daughter just went, "Oh, Dad didn't have a faith. He was like me. He didn't believe." And I was like, "Okay." And I was sitting in their house having a cup of tea, as I always do, and I saw a beautiful photo on the wall. And I said, "Oh, that looks like the inside of St. Michael's Church." And his wife said, "Oh, yeah, you know, didn't matter where we went, we always had to go into the church or the cathedral or the chapel. We always had to go in. He always wanted to be there." And I said, so you talking about a man who was drawn to God then? He was drawn into these places, drawn in search of God. And for me, this is faith. To be drawn towards God, and that happens in different ways.
I tell you, that's quite confusing for me too. Right? Everyone will tell you that wherever I go, I am drawn to Rochester Cathedral, which we'll talk about cathedrals in a minute. Wells Cathedral, obviously, I literally grew up in Wells Cathedral. Every time we go somewhere, my wife and I who both profess not really to have, you know, that, are always drawn to ecclesiastical buildings. Right, now there is one solid reason for that, is that whole Gothic architecture, be it a Norman church or whatever, or wherever, we love all that. Also, my first question is, where are the gargoyles? Okay, because I grew up at Wells Cathedral where they're looking at me. With all the saints, that's great. But the point with that is I'm drawn to that. Also, I've got a real love for iconography, religious iconography. I love all that. But there's a direct link to my childhood, my growing up in houses of God because of my father. So some people might say, well, you're drawn to that because it's comforting.
Because it's familiar.
Yeah, absolutely familiar.
You could do, or you could say that you were drawn to it because it is a place where the peace that passes understanding lives and dwells.
You could say that.
And where the prayers of the centuries have worn the space between earth and heaven thin.
Right, when I walked into St Mary's Church to meet you that first time, there was a strange moment happened, right, which I've acknowledged to everyone who listen, right? I walked through the door, my life is chaos, as everyone will tell you. I am on the go 24/7, and as I walked through the door, I just took a breath, and it felt peaceful. Now, I said to you at the time, that doesn't mean anything other than I find solace in the building itself. But then you have to realise that this building, I walk into this building every day and I never see any peace, right? But walking into that church where so many people had prayed and found solace, maybe that reflected on me, the reflection of God, if you like, rather than full in the face. I can't tell you why that happens, but I do a group in your church now every Wednesday, and every time I walk through that door, the same things happen. Tonight I was late because I forgot to bring the milk and I forgot to bring the sugar. So I went off and got caught at the train tracks. I hate those trains. And then I thought I was going to be late, ended up walking in 2 minutes before, right? Even though I'd been in, gone out, and then came back, everything just slowed down. So I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm not arguing God because for any other reason than I find it interesting that worlds are lost and created through religions. People's reflection of God and their different ideologies towards the thinkings of their gods, create societies. Why is there so much loss of God, loss of society, loss of communities? Why is that happening now to such an extent, or are we just more aware of it because of media?
I think we're probably much more aware of it. There's some sense of there's nothing new under heaven. I think we've forgotten that the ever-changing structure of society and the times of stress and difficulty, because we haven't lived them. We haven't lived through the 1919 flu epidemic. We've lived through COVID, and we think it's much worse than it was then, which it's not. It probably wasn't. It was equally horrible. We've not lived through the depression in the 1930s. We've no idea what that was like.
We've also not lived through any conflict.
No,
like proper World War conflict levels.
We remember as a nation with that we remember what the war was like, but then we don't really know what the fear was like. We just see the lovely Dam Busters movies and we won, so it's okay. But actually it wasn't okay, and the whole of Europe was overthrown by refugees going everywhere. And yet we're worried about the refugee situation now. We don't see with the perspective of God, I don't think. We see with this now, and particularly media-centred, skewed view.
It's very easy to, and this will have to be our final point, because believe it or not, we've run out of time already, but I'm going to ignore the clock. We live in a world where we have media, television that's kind of, the thing that comes to mind is like the sheriff of Nottingham in Robin Hood's Prince of Thieves is the biggest criminal of the lot. A lot of the time, and also the other representative of God in that film, and I know it's a film, I'm not, is a fat monk who drinks too much, but actually God comes out in the end. In reality, religion has been mocked and pulled apart and used as the criminality in so many plays, films, radio things, all of that. So it's very difficult for somebody standing out on their own to say, I believe in this. When everything that is portrayed is evil in a place of peace and a place of goodness, how can you fight against that?
I think that if you can step back from what's happening immediately in front of you in terms of the extremes of religion. What you find is that most people are being supported and comforted by their faith. But what we have, even in the Church of England, but across the religions, between the faiths, is different perspectives of God from different contexts, different countries, different backgrounds, different ways of being community. That means that you have a different list of priorities for what you think is most important about God. But the bottom line is that God is both completely just and completely loving. And somewhere along the line you've got to find a balance between God's love and God's justice, and this is a day-to-day thing.
But you can't find a balance of love and justice because there are human beings that are giving out his message and twisting that to their own ends.
Yeah.
So it's, well, you have the human element involved in religion, then for that twisted perception can be put forward.
Yeah.
I just very briefly, do you know who Hillsong Church are?
Yeah.
Right. And you know about Carl Lentz and in New York. He was the leader of the New York thing, and he had an affair, right? And it's gone back through childhood, trauma for him. Now, okay, he had an affair, which is all bad. His church did not stand up and say, do you know what, mate? I'm going to look after you. We'll take you in. We'll nurture you. What they did was they shunned him and his wife and his family, and they pushed him out.
Yeah.
So he became the pariah.
So that's a lovely example of love and justice struggling, because the justice would say you have fallen short, and the love says it doesn't matter. In my belief about God's love and God's justice is that God's love always exceeds his justice. Yeah, so it doesn't matter what you've done wrong, God loves you still, and he will sort it out. The trouble is that in a church that defines itself by the rules and the regulations and the fact that you must be faithful to your wife and all the rest of it, and there are plenty of churches around here that would say those rules are really important. They're the stepping stones to holiness. They are really important. Let's not put God's justice down here. It's really important that you're faithful to your wife. But God's love always is larger than that. Jesus comes and he says, love God and love your neighbour, and love, the law of love overshadows all the other laws. So if you want a response to anything that anybody's done, you have to love them more than you condemn them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then when there are massive churches that are money machines in this world that are preaching to the vulnerable and the open, that's damaging to the whole thing. And you can't fight that.
No, and that is religion taken off into a wrong route. And, and we have to, we're called to be intelligent, discerning people and to be careful. And I think, to be a priest is a massive responsibility, because what I need to do is make sure that the people that I look after know that God's love is bigger than everything else. And that we're not going to condemn them, and we're not going to lead them down a path that's wrong.
All I'm thinking is that it must be the only people involved in that situation who forgave Carl Lentz, right, was his wife and his 3 children, and strangely enough, Ben, who is the son of the church leader, who was his best friend, right? Those 4 people were the only people in direct church who actually forgave him, and they stayed with him. Yeah, they had to go through all of that work, all of the, you cheated on me, what's going on? But they worked through it all the kids got a time. I think the reason that I bring that up is because I see church as something that is manipulatable by the wrong people.
Absolutely.
And it's very difficult coming from a or a lack of faith scenario, looking at the wide world of church to know who to believe. But people like you, my friend, are people that we should believe. I've seen the way people talk to you, and the way they look at you and look to you for guidance. I've seen that in the very short time that I've been working with you, and it's a privilege to share a table with you. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
Religion is contentious. It is something that you alone can decide where you land. But if there is something or someone or something that can guide you in a way that benefits you, don't close the door. And that comes from me, somebody who's argued against everything since day one. Remember, 50 in Coping is about coping. It's about finding your way in society. It's about finding the right people to put around you. And if you find the right priest, that's where you belong. We'll see you next time.